My name is Michael Watson, and I have always considered myself a lucky person. I have everything you could ever dream of. A beautiful, caring wife, Lisa, a comfortable home in the suburbs of Chicago, and a thriving family business, which we run together with our longtime friend and trusted partner, Rick Carlisle. Life seems stable, predictable, but at the same time filled with comfort, warmth, and a sense of reliability. Everything in her was in its place, like a well-oiled mechanism, working without a single glitch, creating an atmosphere of stability and calm around her. I appreciated this more than anything in the world. Our house was exactly how I always imagined it: spacious, bright, full of comfort and harmony. The two-story mansion, with its snow-white facade, tall windows, and elegant gray tile roof, looked both majestic and welcoming. In front of the house, there is a neatly trimmed lawn with smooth, natural stone paths leading to a massive wooden door with wrought iron patterns. In spring and summer, bright flower beds filled the yard with rich colors, and the grapevine, smoothly twining around the wooden pergola, gave the space a special romance. On sunny days, it was always cozy here. A light breeze played with the delicate rose petals, and the shadow of the old maple fell softly on the wooden terrace where we spent most of the weekend. Lisa paid attention to every detail, turning our house not just into a place to live, but into a real family nest, where comfort and harmony reigned. The living room, furnished modestly but tastefully, always smelled of freshly brewed coffee and vanilla candles. The shelves were decorated with leather-bound books, and an ancient clock quietly measured time, creating a feeling of regularity and peace. The kitchen had a warm atmosphere: carved wooden cabinets, copper utensils that reflected the sun's rays, and the constant aroma of home-baked goods. Lisa especially loved to have breakfast in the fresh air, arranging real morning rituals. The massive oak table set on the terrace always had a beautiful setting: a snow-white tablecloth, neatly arranged porcelain plates with thin gold rims, cups of steaming coffee, and a basket of freshly baked croissants. The air was filled with delicate aromas of vanilla, butter, and fresh fruit. Lisa invariably decorated the table with a bouquet of garden flowers, roses, lavender, peonies depending on the time of year, adding a special charm to the morning feast. Every morning in our house resembled a scene from an ideal film about a happy life, where everything is harmonious, calm, and full of love. In the evenings, we gathered in the kitchen, where panoramic windows offered a stunning view of the sunset. The orange-pink glare of the sun reflected in the glass, filling the room with a soft, warm light. We ate dinner slowly, enjoying every moment. Sometimes Lisa would play soft jazz music, and her little smile would make me feel like I was truly lucky in my life. And then, when the day came to an end, we could relax by the fireplace with a glass of good wine, quietly talking about the day or simply enjoying the silence, full of comfort and understanding. Lisa knew how to create an atmosphere at home. She filled it not just with things, but with details that made the space alive and special. Candles with a subtle aroma of vanilla and cinnamon were burning in the corners of the room. There were always soft blankets on the sofa, and on the shelves there were stylish accessories that she lovingly chose in small designer stores. Everything here exudes warmth and care, and I was proud of what we had. It seemed to me that it would always be like this. Rick and Amy Carlisle were our closest friends, not just friends we saw from time to time, but truly family. Their presence in our lives was something natural, as if they had always been part of our family. We trusted each other unconditionally, shared our innermost thoughts, discussed plans, rejoiced in successes, and supported us in difficult times. "We should repeat that trip to Nice," Rick said, leaning back in a lounge chair on the terrace. "Remember how we rented a villa with our own vineyard then? And how did you try to convince the owner to sell you his entire stock of wine?" Lisa laughed, pouring cool Chardonnay into a glass. It was excellent wine. Rick theatrically clasped his hands. And then Amy drank half of it anyway. "It's not my fault, it was so delicious." Amy smiled and reached for a piece of cheese. We spent holidays together exploring picturesque corners of the world, sailing on azure waters, breathing fresh sea air, and enjoying breathtaking views. The Caribbean islands, the Italian coast, secluded bays of Greece. Over the years of friendship, We have collected a collection of memories, each of which was filled with joy, carelessness, and a feeling of absolute freedom. In the evenings, we dined in the best restaurants, some of which belonged to us. We loved going into the kitchen, watching the chefs hustle, trying new dishes, and figuring out which ones could be added to the menu at our establishments. I have to admit, this chef knows a lot about steak, I said, cutting off a piece of perfectly cooked beef. But his seafood is simply divine. Lisa added, happily tasting fresh oysters. Maybe we should invite him to join us, Rick suggested. Do you want to lure him to our restaurant? Amy narrowed her eyes slyly. Only if he agrees to cook for us personally, Rick laughed, raising his glass. But perhaps the warmest and most soulful were our traditional family barbecues. On summer evenings, we gathered in our yard or at the Carlyles, turning an ordinary dinner into a real celebration. The aroma of juicy meat mixed with a light smoke of a fire, glasses were filled with aged wine, and conversations flowed naturally, like old cognac aged for years. You're oversalting the steaks again, Lisa joked, watching me turn the meat on the grill. And again, you're watching my every move, I laughed in response. Because I know how this will end. She winked and, taking the glass, joined Amy, who was already placing snacks on the table. Hey, maybe I should get a drink, too. Rick, wiping the sweat from his forehead, pretended to be offended. Only if you promise not to forget about the grilled vegetables again, Amy grinned, pointing to the burnt peppers. Okay, I gave up. But if someone burns marshmallows for dessert, it's not my fault. Such evenings seemed like something unshakable, a tradition that we carefully preserved. We laughed, remembered past trips, and made new plans. Our business flourished. A network of elite restaurants, famous in every corner of the city, attracted both bohemians and serious business people. It was not just a job, but a lifestyle in which Rick and I felt like kings of the gastronomic world. Each restaurant was not just an establishment, but a reflection of our philosophy: impeccable service, signature cuisine, and an atmosphere where every guest felt special. We knew our regular customers by sight, guessed their tastes, and anticipated their desires. I bet a bottle of Chateau Margaux that Mr. Davis will order venison tartare and truffle risotto again, Rick grinned, lazily reclining on the leather sofa in the VIP room. If you lose, you'll be serving him wine all evening, I grinned, glancing into the hall. You know I never lose, he grinned and took a glass of golden Chardonnay, taking a leisurely sip. He was not just a partner for me, but also a brother, a person with whom I could share both dizzying ups and painful downs. We have gone through so many things together: crises, sudden inspections, ridiculous scandals in the press that could destroy any company. But every time we came out victorious. Rick was a natural leader. His confidence, ability to find a way out of the most difficult situations, and innate charisma made him the center of any company. Tall, strong, with thick dark hair that was always perfectly styled, he looked as if he was born for success. His gray suit fit perfectly, emphasizing his athletic physique, and his white gold cufflinks sparkled in the soft light of expensive chandeliers. We should open a new restaurant in the center, he said one evening, twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands. We already own half the best establishments in the city, I answered, glancing at him. But we don't own the other half. Rick grinned and looked down at the glass. We don't own it yet. His laugh was infectious, and his ability to persuade was almost hypnotic. He could get anyone talking, bring out the right emotions, force them to take his side, even if the person was categorically against it. In business negotiations, he always kept the initiative in his hands. I've seen even the most confident businessmen become confused as he calmly and methodically sorted out their objections, like a chess player calculating the game several moves ahead. Do you know why we always win? He once asked, looking me straight in the eyes. Because we are the best, I answered, smiling slightly. Because we know when to attack and when to wait, he paused and added, and because we never play by someone else's rules. In those moments, it seemed to me that we were truly invincible. We created our own empire, where every brick was laid with our own hands, and every success was the result of our decisions. Amy, his wife, always seemed to me the embodiment of nobility and loyalty. Her presence filled the room with an invisible aura of calm and intelligence, as if with just her appearance she could muffle the noise of the bustle and direct the conversation in the right direction. Tall, with perfect posture, she was reminiscent of the heroine of old Hollywood films. Sophisticated, but at the same time strong and independent. Her every movement was precise, smooth, as if she lived in a world where there was no place for harshness and chaos. She always looked impeccable. Elegant dresses in discreet colors, thin wrists decorated with sophisticated bracelets, a light aroma of expensive perfume that remained in the air after she left. Amy never sought to be the center of attention, but at the same time it was impossible not to notice her. "You don't think that art will ever lose its value, do you?" I once asked her at one of the dinners, when the conversation smoothly slipped into business and finance. "Never," she answered, slowly tracing the edge of her glass of wine with her finger. "People may become disillusioned with technology, economics, politics, but they will always be drawn to beauty." Her blue eyes looked carefully, appraisingly, as if studying me on some deeper level. She rarely said too much, but when she spoke, her words always sounded confident, filled with meaning. She seemed to see right through people, understanding them better than they themselves. Amy worked in the arts, helping to organize exhibitions of young talent, and always seemed completely immersed in her work. She could talk for hours about artists whom few people knew, but who, in her opinion, were geniuses who had undeservedly remained in the shadows. "You should come to the next exhibition," she said one day, tilting her head slightly. "I'm not sure I understand art," I admitted with a smile. "It doesn't matter," she smiled back, but something flashed in her eyes that I couldn't read then. "The main thing is to feel what the artist wants to say." I respected her for this, for her passion for her work, for her sincere belief that art can change people. Lisa and I and the Carlyles were a team. Four successful, confident people, ready to conquer the world. I remember the day I first saw Lisa. It was a warm fall day during my freshman year of college, a time when auburn leaves swirled through the air and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and freshly purchased textbooks wafted through the cool morning air. She stood on campus at a high bench under a spreading maple tree, holding a paper cup of hot coffee, from which stem rose in a thin stream. Lisa frowned slightly, looking thoughtfully into the distance, as if peering into her own thoughts. Her brown hair, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, fluttered slightly in the wind, and I noticed how she tried to tuck a strand behind her ear, but the wind knocked it out from under her fingers again. I couldn't take my eyes off her eyes, deep, green, as if they reflected the very nature of autumn. They shone with a lively interest in everything around, a slight dreaminess, as if she saw the world a little differently than everyone else. I was watching her, hiding behind the pages of the textbook, but suddenly she turned around, meeting my gaze. A warm, slightly shy smile flashed across her face. We met through Rick. Then he already knew how to charm people, and his swiftness in relationships with women always amazed me. He was not afraid to come up first, start a conversation, joke, and within a few minutes, it seemed as if he had known the person all his life. He had this innate lightness, ease, charisma that rarely anyone could resist. This is how he met Lisa. It was one of the evenings at a student cafe near campus, where we often hung out between lectures. Rain was drizzling outside the windows, smearing the yellow lights of the lanterns on the wet glass, and inside there was a smell of freshly ground coffee and cinnamon. "Girl, you look like you know how to read people," Rick said, deftly moving a chair to her table. Lisa, surprised by such a sudden attack, slowly looked up at him. "Perhaps," she replied, raising her eyebrows slightly. "Then let's check. What do you say about me?" Rick grinned, tilting his head to the side. I watched this with interest. He was in his element, relaxed, confident, as always, but this time something was different. Lisa was not embarrassed, did not blush, as often happened with other girls. She calmly took a sip of her latte and looked at him searchingly. "You love to be the center of attention, you make friends easily, but you don't always say what you really think," she finally answered. "You are charming, but you cannot stand it when someone remains indifferent to your charm. Rick froze for a moment and then laughed. They just figured me out in 30 seconds. Michael, did you hear that? I nodded, hiding my smile. Lisa didn't just attract his attention, she challenged him. He loved to be the one who charms, but this time he had to conquer. I remember well how they started communicating. Rick saw her as a challenge, a bright personality that he wanted to conquer. He invited her to parties, talked about his plans, and brought down the entire arsenal of his charm on her. But over time, it became obvious that Lisa was interested in him more as a friend. She laughed at his jokes, but did not give him that look that shows true sympathy. She appreciated his company, but didn't let him go any further. It amused me then. Rick rarely suffered defeat, especially when dealing with women, and it was interesting to watch how he himself did not yet understand this. What about me? I was there, not pushy, not loud, just someone who listened, understood, who could carry on a conversation without acting, without intentions. Lisa was attracted to something different, something more reliable, stable, and that something turned out to be me. At first, I didn't believe I had a chance. I was different, less expressive, less confident, but always true to my principles. Rick could easily charm people with words, but I believed in the power of actions. Perhaps that is why Lisa began to notice me. When she asked for help with her studies, I put aside my work and helped. When she was sad, I didn't try to cheer her up, I was just there, listening and understanding. This was what ultimately attracted her. One day in the fall, we were walking in a park near campus. It was cool, but not cold, that same pleasant autumn air, saturated with the aroma of wet earth and fallen leaves. Golden foliage rustled softly underfoot, and the sky was covered with gray clouds, which made it seem as if the whole world had become a little quieter, calmer. Sometimes it seems to me that I will never be able to choose one place where I want to live, Lisa said thoughtfully, looking at the branches of the trees from which the wind was tearing off the last leaves. Why? I asked, watching her adjust her scarf, shivering slightly from the cool breeze. Because I like too many things, she smiled and looked at me. I dream of seeing the world. Paris, London, Rome. I want to walk along the ancient streets, drink coffee in small squares, sit on the ocean, and just listen to the waves. I listened to her and suddenly realized that I wanted to be part of this life. It didn't matter to me where I ended up. It was important that she was nearby. I dared to take her hand. It was unexpected even for me. My heart was pounding loudly in my chest. My fingers were trembling slightly. For a second, I thought she would pull her hand away, but instead Lisa squeezed my fingers tighter. We walked in silence, and in this silence there was no awkwardness, only a feeling of something new, something important that would change everything. This moment became the starting point for me. After that walk, we began to spend even more time together, long conversations in the library, morning coffee before lectures, spontaneous trips to the neighboring city to just stroll along the embankment. Everything was so natural, as if it was meant to be. Rick noticed this. He didn't say anything right away, but his views changed. One day, when the three of us were sitting in a cafe, he suddenly grinned and, twirling the spoon in his hands, said, "So, Mike, are you going to ask her out, or should I give you some advice?" I froze, not knowing whether he was joking or being serious. Lisa looked at him with a slight smile and then turned her gaze to me. "I think Michael is doing well without advice," she said softly. Rick looked at her, then at me and nodded, as if he had decided something for himself. Later, when we were alone, he just shrugged his shoulders and said with a grin, "You're a good guy, Mike. Perhaps you really suit her better than me." There was no resentment in his voice, only the usual ease with which he treated many things in life. At that moment, it seemed to me that he accepted everything painlessly. Since then, our life has followed a certain path, like a paved road leading us forward. Lisa and I grew up, gained experience, overcame difficulties together, and supported each other in any circumstances. Her laughter was always a lifeline for me in moments of despair, and her confidence inspired me to move on. We learned to understand each other without words, and this brought us even closer. And then Amy entered our company, a fragile but surprisingly strong-willed girl with a lively mind and a mischievous smile. It's as if she's always been a part of our history, it's just that our paths haven't crossed before. Her acquaintance with Rick happened so naturally that we were not even surprised. As soon as they met, a spark jumped between them, and after a couple of weeks they were already spending time together inseparably, complementing each other, like two halves of the same puzzle. This is how our four formed a team where everyone seemed to have found their role. When we decided to get married, the question of the date was not even raised. Lisa and I and Rick and Amy understood this day should be shared, not just a celebration of two couples, but something more, a symbol of our friendship, devotion, and common future. We had our wedding on a country estate surrounded by greenery. The evening air was filled with the scent of flowers, and the sunset sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, creating a feeling of magic. As Lisa and I stood at the altar, I felt her fingers tremble slightly in my hands, but confidence shone in her eyes. "Are you ready?" I asked quietly, leaning towards her ear. She smiled, squeezing my hand a little tighter. More than ever. Rick and Amy, standing nearby, also looked at each other. I noticed Amy furtively brush away a tear, and Rick whispered something to her that made her laugh. The ringing laughter of the guests was heard around us, music sounded, and all this seemed to be the beginning of something big and important. On that day, we gave each other not only vows of love, but also a promise to go through life together, supporting each other as we always did. And while the clink of glasses echoed in the air and bursts of fireworks were heard somewhere in the distance, I knew we had a whole life ahead of us, full of adventures, happiness, and unchanging friendship. After the wedding celebration, we all went on our honeymoon together, a decision that might seem strange to some. But for us, it was completely natural. We couldn't imagine this important moment without each other. "Well, we're married," Rick exclaimed when the plane gained altitude and endless clouds stretched outside the window. And now the fun begins. Amy, who was sitting next to him, snorted and playfully nudged him with her elbow. "Are you implying that the wedding wasn't interesting enough?" "I'm hinting that now we have 2 whole weeks of absolute rest ahead of us." Rick dramatically threw his hands behind his head, smiling contentedly. I exchanged a knowing look with Lisa. We knew that a vacation with Rick and Amy was more of a series of adventures, spontaneous decisions, and fun adventures than lazy lying on the beach. The place for our honeymoon was a cozy tropical island, where snow-white sand stretched to the very horizon, and the water shimmered in all shades of turquoise. We were placed in a bungalow right by the ocean, and the first thing we heard when we walked inside was Lisa's contented sigh. "It seems like I'll stay here forever," she said dreamily, touching the snow-white curtains fluttering from the light sea breeze with her fingertips. "I don't mind," I chuckled, hugging her waist. But before we could enjoy the moment of solitude, Rick's voice came from outside. "Are you going to spend your entire vacation in a bungalow, or will we still discover this island?" Lisa and I laughed. "Of course, you won't be bored with them." Every day was filled with something new. In the morning we kayaked, exploring hidden lagoons. In the afternoon we snorkeled, discovering the underwater world with its colorful fish and coral reefs. And in the evening we dined on the shore, under the starry sky, endlessly chatting and laughing. "This is the best honeymoon in the world," Amy said one night as we sat on the beach with our feet in the warm sand. "Honestly, I can't imagine how it could have been done better." Lisa nodded, leaning on my shoulder. "It's all about the company." I looked at my friends and realized that she was right. We started this journey together, and now, having become families, we still remained inseparable. It wasn't just a honeymoon, it was a new stage in our lives, full of happiness, adventure, and a shared story that we continued to write. This time became for us the beginning of a new life, full of hopes and ambitions. We made plans, discussed the future, and dreamed of creating something meaningful. And soon our dreams and ambitions came true in our common business. It happened naturally, like the next logical step. We have always been able to work in a team, and now we decided to use this talent in something that could change our lives. I became the basis, the foundation of the entire project, the builder of its concept and long-term strategy. I liked analyzing the market, predicting trends, and finding non-standard ways of development. Rick, in turn, took control of the finances, which was ideal. He always had an amazing ability to see numbers not just as reports, but as a living system in which every detail mattered. Listen, if we invest so much in advertising at the start, we will be left with a narrow budget for operating expenses, he reasoned, laying out the calculations in front of me. I propose to redistribute and strengthen marketing in the second wave, when the first profit will already be made. I shook my head, thinking, but if we don't immediately announce ourselves loudly, there is a risk that we will simply not be noticed. Rick chuckled and leaned closer. That's why you're building a strategy, and I'm looking for how to make it economically profitable. We need to find a balance. This was precisely our strength: different approaches, different views, but one goal. Sometimes we argued, defending our point of view for hours, but in the end we always came to an ideal solution. Okay, I finally said, leaning back in my chair. Let's do this. Let's reduce the advertising budget a little, but keep the main message. Focus on quality, not aggression. Rick grinned, slammed his hand on the table, and extended his hand to me. Now I recognize you, partner. So, step by step, we created a successful and powerful company that quickly conquered the market. Within a few months, our first clients turned into regular ones, and competitors began to eye us with caution. However, differences in personalities always made themselves felt, reminding us that even in the strongest team, there are moments of tension. From the very beginning, Lisa was demanding and a little selfish, not in the sense that she did not care about others, but she always needed attention, confirmation of her importance. She was used to her desires being put first, and if this did not happen, she could become impatient or even irritated. Rick was a lot like her. Ambitious, self-confident, he was never afraid to go ahead if he saw a goal. He was a natural leader who did not like to give in, especially when it came to important decisions. Sometimes his and Lisa's personalities clashed, creating a tense atmosphere. They both loved control, loved to feel their influence on people, even if these people were close to them. "You're deciding everything for everyone again," Lisa once said, crossing her arms over her chest when Rick, at the next meeting without discussion, announced a new direction for the company's work. "Because someone has to make decisions, not endlessly discuss them," he retorted, leaning back in his chair and looking at her defiantly. "Maybe we can try to listen to the opinions of others." Amy interjected carefully, smiling conciliatory. "That's it." Lisa turned sharply to her. "Amy, tell him." But Amy just shook her head. "I'm just suggesting we find a compromise." Amy was generally the complete opposite of Lisa and Rick. Soft, flexible, calm, she had an amazing ability to extinguish conflicts without going into confrontation. She always listened, tried to understand other people's points of view, and supported those around her without demanding anything in return. Her kindness and patience seemed endless, and this is what allowed us to maintain balance in our foursome. "If it weren't for you, we would have been at each other's throats a long time ago," I once admitted to her when Amy and I were alone after a tense conversation between Lisa and Rick. She just smiled and shrugged. "Someone just needs to be the voice of reason." Our friends and acquaintances often joked that perhaps we had chosen the wrong partners. Admit it, don't you think that if there was an exchange of couples, it would be much easier for everyone? Our mutual friend once said, watching Lisa and Rick argue again, and Amy and I looked at each other with a knowing smile. "Perhaps," I chuckled, glancing at Amy, who just shook her head gently. But despite all the differences, we loved our halves for who they were. Even if it was not easy, it was from such complex combinations that our unusual but strong friendship was born. Amy was sitting at a table in a cozy cafe on the corner, slowly stirring her cappuccino with a spoon. The aroma of cinnamon and vanilla enveloped her in a light cloud of comfort, but her soul was restless. Usually she enjoyed such moments, short respites amid the hustle and bustle, when she could just relax, watch passers-by, listen to quiet music flowing from the speakers. But not today. Today, her thoughts were occupied with something completely different. Rick has changed over the past few weeks. He came home later than usual, citing business at the company, but explained everything somehow vaguely, as if he did not want to go into details. His voice became tense, his gaze became distracted, he increasingly retreated into himself, even when they were close. There was a strange indifference in his words that was not there before. "I'm just tired, there's a lot of work," he said, unbuttoning the collar of his shirt and absent-mindedly kissing her on the cheek before disappearing into the shower. Amy tried to convince herself that it was really stressful, that he was just going through a difficult period. But the anxiety inside only grew. She sighed and took a sip of cappuccino, but the usual warmth of the drink did not bring relief. Looking at the passers-by outside the window, she felt an unpleasant lump squeezing in her chest. Are they okay? Is she losing Rick? Taking the phone off the table, Amy hesitated. Was she calling in vain? Maybe she should just talk to Rick again, try to get through to him. But deep down she knew that he would either brush her off again or say that she was screwing herself over. So she called Mike. The beeps went on for too long, and at that moment Amy suddenly realized how much she needed this conversation. Did something happen? His familiar voice finally rang out. There was a slight worry in it, and it made her smile. At least someone noticed that something was wrong with her. "Hi, Mike," she bit her lip, searching for words. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm calling. I need to talk." "You know, I'm always ready to listen," he answered softly. Amy took a deep breath and clutched the cup in her hands. "This is about Rick. It seems to me that something is wrong with him." They agreed to meet. When he entered the cafe, she immediately noticed him. Tall, self-confident, with the usual half-smile. This is how Mike has always been. Even when something bothered him, he knew how to hide it behind a calm expression on his face. He quickly found her with his eyes and headed towards the table, moving with that same casual ease that always set him apart from others. "You've come," Amy said quietly when he sat down opposite. Mike took a quick glance at her cup, where the coffee remained almost untouched, and nodded in understanding, suspecting that her mind was too busy to enjoy the drink. "Amy, you sounded worried on the phone." "What's happened?" he asked, motioning to the waiter. "Black coffee, no sugar," he added automatically before turning his attention back to her. Amy wondered for a moment where to start. How can you tell that she suspects something is wrong? That her husband might be hiding something important from her? She ran her finger along the edge of the cup, avoiding his gaze. "Mike," she finally spoke, lowering her voice. "I think something is going on with Rick." He moved away, became somehow different. I don't know how to explain it, but he is no longer the person I know. Mike looked at her carefully, studying her face, as if trying to determine how serious her concern was. Then he took the cup of coffee he brought, took a sip, and put it back on the table. "Do you think he's cheating on you?" he asked directly, without mincing words, as always. Amy flinched at his words, as if he had voiced something that she herself was afraid to think. Then she chuckled nervously and shook her head. "I don't know, but my intuition tells me that something is wrong. He used to always keep me informed of his affairs, but now I feel that he is hiding something from me, and if anyone can help me figure it out, it's you." Mike sighed, leaning his elbows on the table. "You know, I always thought of Rick as a person who likes to keep everything under control. But if he really is hiding something, then sooner or later it will come out. The question is, do you want to know the truth, whatever it may be?" Amy looked away and then nodded. "Want. I can't live in uncertainty. I need to know what's going on." Mike chuckled, trying to ease the tension. "Well, then we have work to do. Let's find out what secret our dear friend is hiding in his pockets. Just promise me one thing." "Which one?" He leaned closer and spoke more quietly, with a sly smile. "No matter how much you want to, let's not throw his things out the window just yet." Amy smiled back, but her eyes remained worried. "I promise. Although I admit the thought has already crossed my mind." "Oh, I didn't doubt it." Mike playfully rolled his eyes. "But let's get the facts first. I'll try to find out if any of our mutual friends have noticed anything strange. And if you suddenly hear or see something suspicious, let me know." Amy nodded, then sighed, cupping her cup in her hands. "Thank you, Mike. I know I can rely on you." He leaned back in his chair, tilting his head to the side. "Always. You know, you're scaring me, Amy. You look like you're about to receive a death sentence. I'm just afraid that I won't want to know the truth that we find. It's always a risk, but it's better to know the truth than to live in an illusion, right?" She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "Right." Mike slammed his hands on the table. "Great. So, let's begin our little investigation. Let's find out what secrets Rick is hiding. Just control yourself. And please don't make a scene for him ahead of time." Amy rolled her eyes. "Yes, yes, I understand. Although sometimes you just want to take it all and dump it all on him at once." Mike knew that he needed to talk to Rick, but there was no point in doing it directly. His friend was too cunning to simply lay out the truth. Therefore, he decided to invite him to a bar, where he could talk informally, flavoring the conversation with the usual sarcasm and adult humor. Rick showed up right on time, confident as always, with his trademark smirk on his face. "Well, to what do I owe such an invitation?" he asked, sitting down opposite Mike and ordering whiskey. "I wanted to have a drink with my best friend and make sure he's not going crazy." Mike raised his glass, nodding to the bartender. "And of course, ask how your family life is. Do you still remember that you have a wife?" Rick grinned, took a sip of whiskey, and lazily leaned on the back of his chair. "Oh, of course, I remember. Especially when I see the bill for her purchases. So, are you worried about this? How touching, Mike. I never knew you were so caring." "Yeah, that's just the way I am," Mike grinned. "It's just sometimes useful to check whether a friend is about to jump from the ship of family life without a life preserver." Rick put the glass on the table and leaned forward slightly. "Family life. It's like a mortgage. When you sign the papers, it seems like a great idea. But time passes, and you realize that the payments are too high, and there is no way out." Mike laughed, but his gaze remained tenacious. "Deep. So, are you already looking for a loophole from this mortgage?" Rick took another sip and shook his head. "Well, for now I'm just assessing the market. Let's put it this way. Haven't you ever thought, Mike, that life should be a little more interesting? What could there be something outside the usual scenario of husband, wife, work, home?" Mike shook his head thoughtfully. "It all depends on what price you are willing to pay for this more interesting." Rick looked at him and grinned. "And you, I see, are a philosopher today." "Okay, Mike, I get the hint." Did Amy complain? "But if you thought you could expose me so easily, then you clearly underestimate my intelligence." Mike sighed, leaning back. "Yes, I didn't even try. It's just, there are times when you want to make sure that your friend doesn't do something stupid that he'll regret later." Rick narrowed his eyes a little, but quickly regained his carefree appearance. "Nonsense. I? Never. I'm an adult, Mike. It's just that sometimes adults need a little freedom." This conversation only confirmed Mike's suspicions. Rick was up to something, and he wasn't going to stop. He needed to act faster. Rick always knew how to find people's weak points, their hidden desires, their hidden dreams that they were afraid to even talk about out loud. This is how he managed to lure Lisa to his side. She was a woman accustomed to luxury, attention, and delight in the eyes of others. She knew she was beautiful and loved to feel her power over men. However, despite the apparent self-sufficiency, Lisa still needed something more, something that Mike could not give her: a feeling of risk, mystery, forbidden pleasure. Rick understood this from the very first days they met. He had slowly but surely created desire in her over the years, making her look at him differently. He whispered subtle hints, emphasized her husband's imperfections, and pushed her to make comparisons. "You live a life that someone else chose for you," he once said in a half-joking manner. This made Lisa think. There was something dangerous about him, exciting, awakening a fire in her that had long died out in a predictable marriage. The first step was the most difficult: to get her to admit to herself that her marriage had not brought her pleasure for a long time. That Mike, although reliable and loyal, is boring. You are a woman created for fire, but you live in eternal autumn, Rick once told her, and this phrase stuck in her head. He made her feel free, desired, ready for recklessness. It all started with hints, random touches, lingering glances. He was in no hurry, giving her the opportunity to take the first step herself. And when she did it, everything happened like lightning. Their first night was a storm of passion that they had been holding back for so long. She burned in his arms, laughed, gasped with delight, and in the morning, lying next to him, she said, "Why didn't I do this before? Why did I even choose Mike?" Rick knew he had won. Now they were connected not only by flesh, but also by shared secrets. The deeper Lisa plunged into this world, the more she liked to play by its rules. They met in hotels, in empty country houses, in offices after hours. Each time it was hotter, more frank. They shared fantasies, discussed things they never dreamed of talking about with their spouses. Lisa leaned back on the pillows, lazily twirling her glass of wine in her fingers. Her lips curved into a grin as Rick ran his hand down her thigh, barely touching her skin, as if savoring the moment. They had just completed another evening that their spouses could never have imagined. "Mike, poor guy," Lisa giggled, running her finger along the wet mark on her skin. "He still thinks that I belong only to him." What a sweet, naive man. Rick grinned, resting his head on his hand as his eyes slid over her naked body. "And Amy," he paused, stroking the line of her collarbone. "She probably still believes that men are capable of monogamy." Such sweet, helpless naivety. Lisa laughed, taking a sip of the wine, her lips glistening from a drop of alcohol. "Her patience is just slow poison to herself," he continued, squeezing her thigh a little tighter. "I don't even know what she's waiting for. Loyalty? Caresses? Ha!" Lisa snorted again, running her nails down his chest. "Mike is so predictable. The same thing over and over again. Once that's all. You should hear him sigh when he tries. I think he is doing something special." Rick chuckled, his hand sliding lower. "And Amy doesn't even know what a real man is. She is sure that quiet moans are the peak of passion. She doesn't even understand how to feel." Lisa rolled her eyes and ran her tongue along the rim of the glass. Pathetic illusions. They both live in their fantasies. Without their passion hid something more. They had plans, special plans, something much more than just a fleeting romance. They were not just looking for pleasure, they were creating a new reality in which everything would be different. And there was less and less time left. Amy sat at a table in the corner of the cafe, clutching a paper bag in her hands. Her fingers clenched and unclenched convulsively, her nails dug into the thick paper, leaving dents. A hurricane of emotions raged inside her: anger, pain, disgust. My heart was pounding as if it was trying to break out. She wanted to scream, she wanted to smash something against the wall, to throw it all out, but she held back. Everything had to happen here, in this damn cafe, where she usually felt calm. Now the smell of cinnamon coffee, which I once liked, made me nauseous. She looked at one point without blinking, barely breathing, until he appeared at the door. Mike entered late, quickly looked around, and, noticing her, headed to the table. His steps were slow, careful. There was anxiety in his gaze, but not yet understanding. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that in a minute his world would fucking fall apart. "Hello," he said quietly, sitting down opposite. Amy didn't answer. Her hands continued to squeeze the bag. My fingers were shaking. "Amy, you were talking on the phone again like the world was falling apart." "What's happened?" He sat down opposite her, casting an inquisitive glance at her. Amy silently unwrapped the package. Her fingers trembled, but her gaze remained cold, sharp, like a knife blade. She pulled out dark blue lace panties from inside and stood up straight, placing them carefully in front of Mike, like evidence in a courtroom. They lay on the table, absurd, silent, but screaming louder than any accusation. Mike squinted, his eyebrows furrowed, his fingers on the table leaned forward a little, but he didn't touch the thing. His mind was racing to comprehend what the hell he was seeing in front of him. Then his face froze. He recognized them. Oh, he knew this thing damn well. Amy tilted her head to the side, her lips twitching into a subtle smile, icy and filled with contempt. Well, her voice was quiet, almost affectionate, but that made it even more scary. Don't you think this is not quite my size? Mike slowly looked up at her. He wanted to say something, to find at least some explanation, but his lips only twitched, and he closed his mouth. The muscles at the corners of his lips twitched, but no smile came out. Amy continued to look at him, her face unreadable, but fire raging in her eyes. Oh, come on, Mike. Her voice became a little quieter, but harsher. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Or do you just want to convince yourself that this is some kind of ridiculous mistake? She slowly leaned forward. Her breath touched his face, but he did not move. I found them in Rick's car, under the passenger seat. She paused, enjoying his reaction. His fingers tensed, his jaw clenched, but he remained silent. Amy grinned and squinted, whispering, "And damn it, Mike, these are Lisa's underwear." She froze, watching his face change. His mouth was dry. My tongue stuck together and my breathing became heavier. He ran it over his chapped lips, but there was nothing to say. The words stuck in my throat, making it difficult to breathe, making it difficult to think. He stared at the panties as if there was dynamite in front of him with the fuse already burning. One single thought thundered in my head. Well. The fingers clenched into fists, the nails dug into the palms. A heavy, oppressive emptiness squeezed my chest. Bitch. He finally squeezed out, his voice muffled and ragged. Fucking bitch. Amy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked at him with an expression of cold satisfaction, as if she was watching a complex mechanism in which she had not believed for a long time break down. Well, now do you understand what it's like for me, Mike? She slowly tilted her head to the side, studying his face. It's a nice feeling, isn't it? Finding out that your wife is making the bed for your best friend. Mike closed his eyes for a split second, as if he was trying to shake off this information, but it was firmly lodged in his brain, driving into him like a hot iron. You and I are idiots, Mike. Amy chuckled, shaking her head. Two naive idiots who believed in this bullshit about loyalty and we are made for each other. Her words hit him like a blow. Mike swallowed, clenching his fists tightly. He tried to breathe evenly, but his vision was blurry. His consciousness feverishly sorted through memories, filling in the gaps, painting them in new, vile shades. Lisa laughed when he said how much he loved her. Lisa kisses him, whispering that he is the only man in her life. Lisa, who promises to be with him for the rest of her life. And now? Now she had sex with his best friend in the car, kind of cheap. Mike clenched his jaw, his temples throbbed, his heart thumped dully in his ribs. He suddenly realized that he was ready to kill. I have to admit, she has good taste in lingerie, Mike croaked, finally looking up from the trophy of his family life. He picked up the lace with 2 fingers, like a second-hand item on sale, and chuckled. Dear, the kind that people put on knowing that they will definitely not be taken off at home. He threw them back on the table and breathed through clenched teeth. And Rick, that asshole has probably been wearing my horns with pride for a long time. Amy let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. And it doesn't even itch, she said with a grin, crossing her legs. Her voice was calm, but an icy fire burned in her eyes. I used to think that my husband at least respected me, that he would at least try to hide the traces of his entertainment. But no, he didn't even bother to get rid of the evidence. She leaned closer, her lips curling into a grin, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what this is like, Mike? She whispered. It's like he left me a postcard. Dear wife, thank you for being a fool for so long. Mike laughed briefly, but there was nothing joyful in the sound, only compressed pain and bitter realization. Well, Amy. He shook his head, looking into space. Welcome to the Cuckold Club. Apparently, you and I are not just partners in misfortune, but the 2 main clowns of this circus. They sat in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts, in an endless series of unanswered questions. The waitress brought them coffee, but no one moved to take the cup. Amy looked at the steam rising from the dark liquid and suddenly clenched her fists. "You know what, Mike?" Her voice became almost gentle, but there was steel in it. "I don't want to be a clown anymore." She looked up at him, and in her eyes there was not only despair, but also something else. Something that made Mike's stomach turn. Lisa lay on the bed, lazily running her finger over Rick's smooth skin. The hotel room was in twilight, the smell of expensive whiskey mixed with the remnants of her perfume, leaving a tart, exciting aroma in the air. They had just finished another storm of passion, but Lisa's thoughts were far from the bed. Everything went according to plan, but there was little time left, and every minute of delay irritated her more and more. "We're taking too long," she muttered, nibbling on Rick's earlobe. "We need to sell everything as quickly as possible, before these idiots realize that we're taking everything away from under their noses." Rick, lying relaxed with his eyes closed, grinned and ran his hand along her thigh. "You're getting impatient, baby. Relax. Everything is going as it should. I have already found a buyer for the house. Cash, no questions asked." Lisa raised herself on her elbow, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Great. What about business? Mike isn't such an idiot that he won't notice if we start withdrawing money." Rick opened his eyes, stretched lazily, and grinned. "Oh, honey, that's the beauty of it. Have you forgotten who controls the finances? He has no idea what documents he is signing. I have already prepared the papers. Forging a signature is a matter of a couple of minutes, and he won't even realize it until he ends up with nothing." Lisa laughed, running her nails along his chest. "Damn, I love it when you're so confident. What about Amy? She was always too observant. Maybe she already suspected something." Rick grinned, raising the glass of whiskey to his lips. "Let him suspect. What will she do? Will he try to talk to Mike? This will only speed up our work. They are both too stuck in their own ideas about family values. It will take them time to realize that everything has already been decided, but we don't have it." Lisa nodded, watching her lover with satisfaction. She never liked cowardly men, and there was something about Rick that drove her crazy, a predatory confidence bordering on recklessness. He didn't just know how to play, he enjoyed the process. "We won't wait longer than a week," she said decisively. "We'll sell the house tomorrow. We'll register the business the day after tomorrow. And then we disappear, where they won't find us, where there is no Mike, no Amy, no past." Rick smiled, pulled her towards him, and whispered, "How about we celebrate our bright future right now?" Lisa leaned down, their lips meeting in a slow, lingering kiss. Tomorrow they will sell everything. Tomorrow their new life will begin. Today was the last evening when they could enjoy their impunity. Mike sat at the kitchen table, his fingers clutching his phone tightly and his heart pounding. Next to him, Amy, pale as if she had seen a ghost, looked at the laptop screen where the audio recording was played over and over again. Their worst suspicions were not only confirmed, they exceeded their worst expectations. "These bitches." Mike breathed, feeling rage boiling inside him. Amy swallowed, her hands shaking. "They don't even doubt their plan," she whispered. "They just laugh at us, as if we were a couple of idiots." A few days ago, when suspicions became unbearable, they decided to take a desperate step. Amy cleverly placed a miniature recording device in Rick's bag, and Mike hid the same gadget among Lisa's things. This was their only chance to find out the truth, and now the truth lay before them in the form of dirty, cold words of betrayal. Rick's lazy, self-confident voice sounded on the recording. "Forged signatures. It's easier than stealing candy from a child. Mike always signs everything I give him. He won't even look." Lisa's laugh sounded loud and cruel. "And Amy? This fool probably still believes in family values. Honestly, sometimes I even feel sorry for her. It's not worth it. Fuck them both. Tomorrow we sell the house, then we leave with the money. By this time, they will be standing among the ruins of their lives and wondering how this happened." Amy sharply pressed pause, her eyes shining with anger and pain. She turned her gaze to Mike, who slowly stood up from the table. There was rage in his eyes, ready to tear everything in its path. "We will destroy them," he hissed. Amy wiped her eyes, her voice trembling, but there was determination in it. "No, Mike. We will do everything so that they fall into their own trap. Now they are not just deceived spouses. Now they were the hunters and their traitors the prey." Rick sat back in his hotel room chair, watching with a satisfied smile as Lisa nervously flipped through printouts of documents. They just checked all the papers, everything was perfect. Forged signatures, fictitious accounts converted into cash. They sold the house, dropped all obligations, and now there was nothing holding them back. "You understand, baby," Rick said lazily, stretching. "You and I did the impossible. We left these idiots with nothing, and no one even realized what happened." Lisa looked up from her papers, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I know. It feels damn good. Did you see Mike's face when he signed his last contract? He didn't even bother to read it. God, it was so easy." Rick laughed, giving her an admiring look. "That's why I love you. You're not just beautiful, you're smart. Now all that remains is to board the plane, and that's it. We no longer exist." They packed their bags, methodically got rid of everything unnecessary, burned papers, erased traces. Lisa brushed the ashes from her palm, watching the shreds of the past burn out in the sink. Rick zipped up his backpack, checking the most valuable things: passports, money, tickets. Everything was in place. They handed over the car keys to the rental company without looking back. Memories, plans, promises are left behind. Everything that connected them with their former life turned to dust. At the airport, they checked in without the slightest problem. The fake passports looked perfect, the biometrics matched, and calm, even slightly relaxed smiles played on their faces. The world continued to live its normal life. No one looked back, no one knew that they were going to disappear. Forever. In the waiting area, Rick ordered himself a strong espresso. Lisa chose a glass of white wine. They sat down near the panoramic window, behind which lay the night runway. The planes glided smoothly across the sky, reminding them that soon they themselves would be among these lights flying away. "Where would you like to go first?" Rick asked, thoughtfully twirling the spoon in his cup. Lisa smiled, raising the glass to her lips, took a small sip, and closed her eyes. "To Italy. Let's start with Rome. I want to drown in luxury." Her voice was dreamy, but cold calculation splashed in her eyes. Rick chuckled, leaning a little closer to her. "Well, there's nothing left. Our flight is in an hour, and we are free." They exchanged satisfied glances and clinked glasses. Everything went according to plan, or at least that's what they thought. They didn't even notice that their most important suitcase luggage stuffed with cash had been switched. The airport was buzzing with bustle. Streams of people scurried between the terminals, some rushing to the gate, some nervously checking their tickets, and some just sitting in their chairs, absent-mindedly looking at their phone screens. Loudspeakers blared flight announcements incessantly, sometimes drowning out the general din of voices, suitcases, and footsteps. Rick and Lisa walked slowly, unhurriedly, as if enjoying the last minutes before the flight. They were relaxed and confident. Their expensive clothes reeked of sophistication and wealth. Lisa was in an elegant trouser suit. Her hair was pulled back into a perfect bun, and gold bracelets sparkled on her wrist. Rick is a tall, powerfully built man, wearing an expensive suit that fit him like it was tailor-made. In one hand, he held a leather suitcase, and with the other, he gently hugged Lisa around the waist. They already saw a plane in front of them that was supposed to take them away to a new life full of luxury and carefree. But suddenly people in uniform appeared in front of them. 4 police officers and 2 FBI agents. Clearly controlled movements, tense faces hidden under a cold mask of professionalism. Their appearance was so abrupt that Lisa involuntarily stopped, and her hand with a glass of wine trembled. Richard Carlyle, Lisa Watson. The officer's firm, unapologetic voice cut the space like a knife. Rick tensed. Everything inside tightened, but outside he remained calm. He saw how Lisa turned pale, how her breathing became labored, but he could not let her show it. They've got it all figured out. They had false documents, a carefully planned route, and a backup plan. They just need to stay calm. You are under arrest. Raise your hands immediately and don't move. The officer continued, stepping closer. Lisa froze. Time seemed to slow down. The glass of wine slipped from her weakened fingers and broke with a crunch on the tiled floor, scattering into dozens of pieces. The red stain of the drink quickly spread, as if symbolizing something irreversible. Rick resisted the urge to curse. His thoughts were racing feverishly. They thought through everything, took into account every little detail, every detail. Why were they stopped? How? You were probably mistaken, he said, adding a note of surprise and slight irritation to his voice. What are we accused of? The officers quickly closed in around them, like predators surrounding their prey. One of the FBI agents, a short man with hard features and icy eyes, took a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of his jacket and unfolded it. You are accused of financial fraud, and... The agent paused, deliberately maintaining dramatic silence before he said the last word. The murders of Michael Watson and Amy Carlisle. Lisa shuddered. Her breathing became labored, as if someone was squeezing her throat with an invisible hand. She looked at Rick for confirmation that this was just a mistake. But his face, he clenched his fists. His jaw tensed. And at that second, she realized that everything had collapsed. They lost. We know that you forged signatures, converted the money into cash, and were preparing to escape. The agent continued, not taking his eyes off them. We also know that your spouses are dead. The only question is, where did you hide their bodies? Lisa made a quiet, strangled sound, like a sob. Onlookers began to gather around them. Someone took out a phone, filming what was happening. Someone was whispering, looking fearfully at the scene. The air was filled with tension. "This is nonsense," Rick shouted, trying to maintain his composure. But he was immediately grabbed by the arms and spun around, twisting them behind his back. The iron cold of the handcuffs squeezed my wrists. "Everything you say can and will be used against you in court," the officer said calmly, fastening the locks. Lisa screamed, twitching, but she was grabbed with the same confidence. She gasped, trying to comprehend what was happening. How? They didn't kill anyone. They should have already been sitting on the plane, drinking champagne and laughing at how cleverly they managed to fool everyone, but instead cold handcuffs. Views from hundreds of people. Phone cameras filming their shame. The sounds of voices, whispers, and muffled comments. "Oh my God, these are the ones they are looking for. They say they killed their spouses. Go crazy." The agents didn't give them time to think. They were turned around and led through the hall, confidently, quickly, not paying attention to Lisa's screams and Rick's muffled curses. To them, they were just another criminal, another couple who thought they could cheat the system. Behind them were fragments of a broken glass, spilling wine, and an unfulfilled dream of a new life. As they were led through the airport hall, the crowd of passengers parted. Someone was filming what was happening on their phones, someone was whispering. And at the far end of the terminal, watching what was happening with a slight grin, stood Mike and Amy. Mike leaned over to Amy and whispered quietly, "Don't forget your suitcase, Amy. We will need it." She nodded, without taking her eyes off the detainees. They thought of everything down to the smallest detail. Staging their murder was only part of the plan, leaving traces, fake evidence, and most importantly, substituting blood and DNA that confirmed their death. And when the police received a false tip and discovered evidence, suspicion automatically fell on Rick and Lisa. Now everyone was sure that Mike and Amy were dead, and the only ones who could know anything about the whereabouts of their bodies were their own spouses. Game over. As they were led through the airport, the atmosphere was tense, almost electric. People parted to make way for the police, and some of the passengers, taken by surprise, hesitated before giving way. There was something elusive in the air, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and thirst for sensation. Someone took out a phone to film what was happening. Others just looked at each other, whispering. At the far end of the terminal, in the shadow of an advertising stand, two people watched the scene with a slight grin. Mike stood relaxed, arms crossed over his chest, while Amy leaned forward slightly, as if trying to catch every detail of what was happening. Her eyes incessantly watched as the detainees were escorted to the exit. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of her lips. Mike slowly leaned towards Amy. His voice was barely audible, but in this silence filled with tense anticipation, his words were like a lightning strike. "Don't forget your suitcase, Amy. We will need it." She nodded without even blinking, as if her thoughts were far away, occupied with something much more important. Maybe she was remembering every detail of their plan, checking in her mind to see if they had left some kind of loophole. Or perhaps she simply enjoyed watching an elaborate trap spring shut. They thought of everything down to the smallest detail. The staging of their murder was not just a script for a crime drama, it was a masterpiece of planning, a perfect mechanism in which every cog fell into place. False evidence, fake blood and DNA tests, and most importantly, a well-crafted trail leading straight to the right victims. They knew that the police were hungry for quick solutions, and when an all-too-obvious suspect appeared on the horizon, no one would dig deeper. And now that the cops have received a false tip and discovered compelling evidence, suspicion automatically falls on Rick and Lisa. Just imagine their spouses, the people who were closest to them, will now be at the center of the investigation. They will be accused of murder, they will be presented with evidence, and although they will fight to the last, they will not be able to prove anything, because the evidence is too good, too real. A satisfied smile played on Mike's lips. He's always been good at these types of games. He knew how to manipulate the system. He knew how to make people see exactly what he wanted them to see. And today, this art has reached its peak. Amy turned to him, something like excitement sparkling in her eyes. "Do you think they already understand what they've gotten themselves into?" she asked with feigned innocence. Mike chuckled, his fingers tightening slightly on the strap of the bag he was holding. "I think the realization will come to them when they find themselves in the interrogation room. Maybe even sooner when they see how the cops look at them. Those looks." He shook his head. "Oh, I would give a lot to see the look on their faces." Amy giggled, but then pulled herself together. They're not done yet. The passengers continued to watch what was happening with curiosity. The police officers accompanying Rick and Lisa looked concentrated, their faces expressing the cold confidence that they were right. Everything went according to the script that Mike and Amy wrote a few months ago. When the idea was first conceived, it seemed too risky, too complicated. But the deeper they dived into the details, the more they thought through each move, the more clearly they understood that they could do this. Moreover, they should do it. Amy looked at her watch. Time. They can't stay here too long. They did everything they needed to do. Now their story is over. Mike nodded, as if catching her thoughts, and they turned around, moving towards the exit. The suitcase was in her hands. Inside is their new life. Fake passports, money, tickets. They will disappear. Nobody will see them again. And when the media announces the trial in a few days, when cameras capture the faces of those convicted, Mike and Amy will be far away, perhaps on some exotic island enjoying the sea and freedom. Mike and Amy disappeared. By the time the police completed their investigation and the court handed down a guilty verdict, they had long been out of reach. Their traces disappeared as completely as a ship dissolving in the morning fog. They left behind not only their previous names, but also their entire past life, habits, contacts, even linguistic expressions that they used before. Nothing remained of the former existence, only memories, which over time were to turn into ghostly shadows of the distant past. They knew that if they wanted to truly start over, they couldn't leave behind even a hint of their former selves. Their first stop was Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, a city that seemed specially created for those who want to get lost. A modern metropolis with a population of several million people, it attracted people from all over the world. Businessmen, adventurers, fugitives, desperate seekers of a new destiny. Among all these people, they were just a couple of faces in the crowd, unremarkable. Here they crossed paths with a man who didn't ask questions, didn't show curiosity, and worked exclusively for money. For a large sum, he provided them with not just new documents, but a new identity, a new biography, a new version of themselves. Now they were no longer Mike and Amy Watson, but became Alejandro and Sofia Delgado Americans with Latin American roots who allegedly decided to start a new life in Europe. Their past officially ceased to exist. Having received Brazilian passports, they did not stay in the country longer than required. They understood. The sooner even those few who helped them with fake documents disappeared from view, the better. Their next goal was Spain, a country with a warm climate, relaxed atmosphere, and a huge number of tourists. It was here that they were drawn, because here they could disappear into the flow of visitors, become part of a motley mosaic, without arousing suspicion. They chose Valencia, a city where the sun shines most of the year, where the narrow streets of the old quarter are adjacent to modern embankments, and the sea becomes a natural border between the past and the future. New names, new faces, new life. They didn't just run, they built their future. The money stolen from Rick and Lisa became their foundation, but instead of spending it on luxury and attracting attention to themselves, they invested in businesses that not only provided them with legal status, but also created the appearance of honest citizens. A chain of small hotels aimed at tourists quickly gained popularity. The papers were in order, tax payments were made on time, everything looked completely legal. But even with new names and a new life, they couldn't just forget everything that happened. In the first months, fear remained with them, hiding in the shadow of their success. They followed the news from the USA, watched the trial, listened to how Rick and Lisa desperately tried to justify themselves, but all the evidence spoke against them. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Several years have passed. Alejandro and Sofia settled in Spain. Their hotel business flourished. They traveled the world, enjoying the freedom that they had once tried to take away from them. They no longer looked back, no longer hid, no longer waited for FBI agents to knock on the door. Everything that once connected them with America is a thing of the past. At some point, they realized that they no longer thought about revenge. They no longer felt pain and did not remember the betrayal. There was something more in their lives. Mike and Amy had always been close, but their relationship from the very beginning was built on completely different foundations than most couples. They were united not by a romantic passion, not by a chance meeting, but by a common pain, a desire to find justice, albeit in their own, distorted understanding of the word. They became partners not only in life, but also in escape, in the intricacies of the new reality that they created for themselves. They were connected not only by feelings, but also by common secrets, a common past that no one should have known. However, over time, when the need to hold on to each other for revenge disappeared, they realized something amazing. They not only got used to living together, they became each other's only real support. All the masks were torn off, all the roles were played, and behind them only the truth remained. Real, deep love, which grew out of difficulties, out of fear, out of flight, but at the same time turned out to be stronger than they could have imagined. They were everything to each other. 2 years after moving to Spain, when life had become more stable, they made an important decision. They got married. This was not the wedding that many people dream of. Without a white dress, without a crowd of guests, without a formal hall and a magnificent feast. They didn't need it. That day, under the starry sky, on the sandy shore, where soft waves gently washed the shore, they stood opposite each other, holding each other's hands, and swore their love, which had already gone through so many trials. It was a moment that belonged only to the two of them. No witnesses. Without prying eyes. Only they and the ocean, reflecting countless stars in its dark waters. But their story didn't end there. A year after the wedding, an event occurred in their lives that completely erased the boundary between past and present. They had a son. A small, tiny bundle of life. Their first true miracle is Marco. His arrival changed everything. There was no more room for fears, no more room for old shadows. They became not just fugitives, not just spouses, but parents. 2 years later, their happiness doubled. A daughter was born, Isabella. Now they were no longer what they once were. They no longer thought about the past, no longer looked over their shoulders in fear of being exposed. They didn't run, they lived. Their world no longer revolved around secret plots or plans to escape or thoughts of who they once were. Now their world revolves around family. For them, Marco and Isabella became symbols of a new chapter, proof that they were truly able to leave the past behind. They didn't tell the children about what happened before. To them, they were just mom and dad, successful owners of a small resort, who loved to travel, laugh, and spend time together. Sometimes, on warm Spanish evenings, sitting on the terrace of their house with a glass of wine, they remembered the past. They remembered how they once were Mike and Amy, how they burned with rage, how they made the perfect plan. But now it seemed something alien, distant. They weren't the same people anymore. "Do you think they are still trying to prove their innocence?" Amy once asked, smiling at the corner of her lips. Mike chuckled, leaning back and looking out at the sunset. "Maybe, but who cares now?" She nodded and reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Would you do it all again?" she asked after a short pause. He turned his head towards her, his gaze warm and confident. "Yes," he answered, "for our sake, for the sake of this life. For you and our children, I would do it again." And she knew he was telling the truth. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.